Chapter 8, the Political Philosophy of St. Robert Bellarmine. Today is our final class discussing the saint's work on political and societal beliefs as far as the philosophy of what the Church's philosophy is. So now we come to a very core question, and that is, what should the fundamental concern be of a man's life? Rose? Religion. That's exactly the word that was used. Now, why didn't Bellarmine say, shouldn't his concern be his salvation? Why would he say religion? Stephen? Okay, salvation is part of religion. That's very true. Pat? Not all religions are going to give you salvation. That is true too. But also got to look at the standpoint that he's coming from, I think. I think you're both right about that. He's talking about here the methods and modes. He's not talking about the rites. He's not talking about virtues. Okay? If he is talking about virtue, he's talking about rights. He's talking about it from a general standpoint, societal standpoint. From a societal standpoint, can society save itself? Can society save itself? No, society can't. Individuals can. Okay? But society can adopt a religion. Okay? And so man's fundamental concern needs to be picking the right religion in general. Okay? Because that will lead you, as both Pat and Stephen mentioned, to salvation if you follow through. I mean, there's other things that go along with it as well. Yes?
What's today's date?
Today is the 8th. Okay. So what is one of the guarantees of a true, interesting, one of the students asked me this yesterday. He says, Bellarmine does not actually talk about republics. He talks about the three forms of government being an aristocracy, a democracy, and a monarchy. Well, I know it was called the Roman Republic, but really it was more of an aristocracy. It was trying to become a republic, okay, but before it got there, it became basically a monarchy, okay? Why do I say that? Well, the Greeks had democracy, okay, in its truest sense, mob rule, not a good, turning into mob rule. The Romans didn't want that, so they went with more of an aristocracy, a republic with a senate. They, however, were starting to move towards having a voice for more of the common people to be there, but it didn't quite get there because by the time that was happening, Julius Caesar came into play and Rome ended up with an emperor instead of a true republic. So there was no real republic at the time of the writings of Bellarmine. It had never actually been successfully put together. That's why it was called the American experiment. Because the founding fathers said, okay, we're going to try to take all these different pieces and make what we're going to call a true republic. Not just an aristocracy republic, not a democratic society, but an actual republic where we have bits and pieces from each of these different things. So when Bellarmine asks the question, what is the guarantees of a true democracy? That's because there was no republic for him to ever take a look at. Not in the true sense of the word. He was putting together a blueprint for a republic. He was. Okay? So what is the guarantees of true democracy? What is one of the guarantees? An important one is what we're talking about along the same subject matter. Come on, what was the first question, Michael? Religious freedom. Okay? So true democracy will give you religious freedom. Okay? That would be one of the major guarantees. Now notice it did not say religious the establishment of a religion. Okay? Talking about true religious freedom, which is very interesting because the Protestants like to talk about the Inquisitions and the Crusades. Not just the Protestants, but modern man. Okay? The atheists and the secular humanists and the evolutionists all like, and the socialists and the communists all like to go back and change history. And in their version of history, the Crusades were done by an tyrannical Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church was all about establishing kings to rule over people, kings like the Pope, which is entirely not true. That doesn't mean that the Catholic Church would not recognize a monarchy. In fact, it did. I mean, you had the Holy Roman Emperors. The Catholic Church was never involved in deciding what type of government the people should have. That was up to the people. Okay? And the common thought is that religious freedom came about because of the Judeo-Christian values of our founding fathers. Well, that's just absolutely not true. Didn't we talk about this already? That's one of the reasons we looked at the earlier history before we got to the Constitution. In the United States, the people who fled from England and Holland and Germany and anywhere else were fleeing religious persecution. When they got here, they did not set up societies that allowed for religious freedom. They did not tolerate anyone who did not worship in the way that they did. They came here to establish their religion as the religion in their society. That's what they came here to do. They weren't looking for religious freedom. They were looking to establish their religion. In fact, that's why you had so many people branching off of, especially in the New England states. You had the Puritans and everyone and the Quakers eventually all leaving and going to other places because they were being persecuted. There was no religious freedom for Catholics. In fact, it was Catholic Maryland that had the first Religious Toleration Act put into place. Why? Well, because that's the teaching of the Catholic Church. True religious freedom for everyone. Why? We've answered this question already, but I want to see if you know, if you've actually figured that out and not just answered it. Pat? Right. Okay? There's no such thing as free choice. Otherwise God would just impose the beliefs upon us, wouldn't he? Don't we have the right to decide, the right to make the choice about our own souls, to find the true religion or to reject it? That is, we do have that right. That is a right given to us by God. Doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. Okay, there's a difference in goodness and badness versus just having the ability. All right? So that is the answers the next question. What is the rationale for granting equal protection? Because religious conviction is a matter of conscience and good faith before God. That is the number one thing that we have to decide in life, is what we are going to do as far as making a choice before God as to how we're going to behave and what we're going to believe. Whether we're going to accept God and live by His rules or live by our own rules. Okay? So, what we've been talking about so far has to do with governmental systems imposing any kind of restrictions upon religious freedom, right? All right? Because it's a matter of conscience, individual conscience before God. Now, let's flip that around. What do Christian subjects owe the rulers? What do Christian subjects owe rulers, Gabby? Obedience. Now, let's define that a little bit. I mean, you're right. But if a Christian ruler was to tell you to abort your child, could you obey that? Okay, so what caveat do we need to, or how do we make this a little bit tighter? Obedience, but it's not just full obedience, right? It's obedience. Moral. Okay, moral is a good word. I like that. Okay? Moral, or if the law is not contrary to the law of God, right? The law must be moral, or at least, not contrary to the law of God. Because some laws have nothing to do with morality. They just don't. You may not like them, but they have nothing to do with morality. They tell you that you need to pay 30% income tax. You might make the argument that you really don't like that, and that it really has nothing to do with the proper mode of government in the United States, because the Constitution doesn't give the federal government the right to impose income tax. There's nothing morally wrong with it, and as such, you would still have to follow it. It's not contrary to the law of God. There's just nothing moral or immoral necessarily about that law. Okay, unless it goes too far. Okay, going back to religion then. What is an essential part of any true religion? What is an essential element in an ideal organization of Christian religion? There's one element that must be there. David? Unity. Very good. Why unity? Why unity? Don't think too deeply about it. It's not that hard. Why would unity be important? How many gods are there? There's one. And that God came down. And did that God tell us how he wants us to worship him? Did he? Yes. He did. Okay. So, if there's one God who gave us one way to worship, if you worship in any other way, then you're not in unity with God, and that would be incorrect worship, right? So, there only can be one true way to worship. It's that simple. It doesn't need to be any deeper than that. Okay, so then in the church, if there is this unity in this religion, how do the ministers of the church, how are they given their spiritual authority? How do they get their spiritual authority? Where does it come from? Where does it come from? Nick? Who is the Pope? You be more descriptive about the Pope. Who's the Pope? He is he's the head of the church. What else is he? The vicar of Christ. Okay, so the authority comes from Christ. Good. Okay. Comes from Christ. The spiritual authority comes from Christ, comes from God. That's where the unity comes from. Because it was Christ who gave us the one way true to worship. Okay, and it was through Christ that the ministers of the church were ordained. Okay, and they were ordained by the apostles, who were ordained by Christ himself. Okay, to start the church, ordained by the apostles and passed all the way down from the time of the apostles. All right? Now, here's an interesting question nowadays, because we have, there's a law in the United States that charitable organizations are not taxed, right? So why do clerics, meaning the church, priests, etc., those who have taken holy orders, not have the right not to be taxed? I just to say that. They actually have the right to be. Why do they have that right? Nick? They're already doing public service, aren't they? Why don't they dedicate their lives to other people? Why should they then have to be taxed for that? I mean, they have literally given their lives over to the service of the public at large. To then tax them would be to try to, would diminish their ability to even do that. Right? That's the purpose of taxes. The purposes of taxes are supposed to be for the public good, so the government can do the public good, can build roads and protect the nation and other things like that. But the priests and other clerics are already doing that. Okay? And then finally, and these are some questions that might come up during, people like to slam the church on certain things. Why does the church need to be able to own property? Dominic?
So the government just can't come in and take it away all the time.
Okay, so the government can't come and take it away. What else? Yes? Jimmy?
Other governments can't say they have the influence.
Okay, good. What else? Anyone else? How about just for the fact that they need to have it in order to promote religion among the rest of us? I mean, don't you need property in order to build a church on, to have a church? Doesn't a priest need a place to live? Don't sisters need a convent to live in? I mean, they're still human beings. Even though they're doing the public good, the church still needs a place to be. I mean, when you have the government of a large church like the Catholic Church, they need offices. I mean, people have questions that need to be answered. They need to try cases. They need to train future priests, seminaries, okay? I mean, it's a fairly simple answer. And people sometimes get up in arms about it, but it'd be ridiculous to ask anyone else in any other setting in life not to own property. How are you going to do anything? How are you going to get the job done? And they're the most important job in the world, don't they? Saving souls. All right, and finally we'll get to the very end of the book here, which is it's actually just the conclusion. Are there any forms of government that are exempt from being able to fall into tyranny? I think we answered this already. Pat mentioned the theocracy. But assuming that there's not going to be any theocracy anymore, there is no form of government that cannot descend into tyranny. Yes? All right. Are any of the forms of government, the ones that Bellarmine has laid out, the democracy, aristocracy, monarchy, or if we want to add in a republic, are any of them necessarily inconsistent with true liberty? No, none of them are. Even a monarchy is not inconsistent with true liberty. We talked about that. Okay? Just because you have a king doesn't mean that the people can't have true liberty. As long as the people have the ability to decide whether or not that king is doing a good job and can get rid of him or not. Okay? And then finally, I want to end our discussions of Bellarmine by just taking a brief look at it's in part of the conclusion in the end of the book. And I'm not going to look at all of these, but I want to take a look at a few because I've mentioned to you that I believe that our founding fathers really did rely upon the writings of Bellarmine when they drafted the Declaration of Independence and the other founding documents. And that they really couldn't admit to that because the whole of the population of America basically was Protestant, other than really about 20 or 25,000 people. Interestingly enough, even though there were two men involved in the drafting of the Constitution. But let's take a look at some of the, I think, undeniable proof that Bellarmine's writings influenced our founding fathers. So if we were to take a look at Bellarmine's writing, Bellarmine says that political power emanates from God. Okay? The Virginia Declaration of Independence, Declaration of Rights, I should say, the power is by God. And the Declaration of Independence says the people are endowed by their Creator with their rights, their unalienable rights. Bellarmine states that men must be governed by someone, lest they be willing to perish. It is impossible for men to live together without someone to care for the common good. Society must have power to protect and preserve itself. Declaration of Independence. To secure these rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, governments are instituted among men. Bellarmine. In a commonwealth, all men are born naturally free and equal. Really interesting terminology, isn't it? Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Almost the exact same words. Bellarmine. For a legitimate reason, the people can change the government to an aristocracy or a democracy or vice versa. It depends upon the consent of men to place over themselves a king, a consul, or a magistrate. Declaration of Independence. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute a new government. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And then there's some actually rather interesting information about Madison and Jefferson, and it talked about how both of them were almost for surely had read most of Bellarmine's works. Bellarmine's works were present in the colleges they went to. Both men were known for having read basically all of the manuscripts that they could get their hands on at the colleges and institutions that they went to. So they were definitely influenced by Bellarmine, whether or not they actually would ever admit that or not. It's in the words of our very Declaration of Independence. Okay? Declaration of Independence, a Catholic document. Interesting to think, isn't it? And that's why the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution come under such heavy attack by liberals today because they don't like the Catholic Church, they don't like God. And so they'll even try to pit the two against each other and say that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, even though they were written many parts by the same men, okay, they try to pit them against each other to say that they don't stand for the same things. And it's just so untrue. The two so wonderfully complement each other. So that is an end of our discussion of the political philosophy of St. Robert Bellarmine.